Everybody, and welcome back to our Professional Development webinar series with our presentation titled Rebuilding Parishioners, Moving from Consumers to Contributors with Tom Corcoran. For those of you who are with us for the first time, my name is Jared Dees. I'm the Digital Publishing Specialist at Ave Maria Press, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you exclusively in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. Everybody in our audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions, and questions may be sent to our presenter using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed on your screen here. Please take a moment now to find that box for typing questions on your GoToWebinar panel. Click the send button at the bottom right-hand corner, and they'll be sent to me, and I'll read as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation today. I'd also like to note that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you later this week. During the live presentation, this is something new, you'll be able to see the presenter's face and my face, but during the recording, you'll only be able to see our slides. So now that we've gone through the technical info, let's extend a very warm welcome to Tom Corcoran. Tom Corcoran has served the Church of Nativity in a variety of roles, beginning as youth minister. Corcoran held positions as coordinator of children's ministry and as director of small groups. He serves as the associate to the pastor and is responsible for weekend message development, strategic planning, and staff development. Tom is the author of the best-selling book Rebuilt and the forthcoming book Tools for Rebuilding, which will be published next month. So Tom, welcome back. Thanks for being with us again today.
Thanks, Jared. Great to be with you. I'm not sure it's really that much punishment that people can't see us when they listen to the message later. So.
Yep, sorry everybody who's watching the recording.
Yeah.
Okay, here comes the controls over to you, Tom, so you can pull up your keynote, and we can follow along there.
Sorry, let me get that pulled up. Here we go. And I'll just, before I want to start with some prayer, but I do have a cold, so if at some point I lose it, I apologize for that. Just sometimes after talking for a while, I get like a tickle in my throat, and so Jared will jump in and just kind of talk to you guys for a minute while I get myself together, but I got some cough drops, I got some water, hopefully good to go. So let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit, amen. And Father, we just take a moment to breathe in, Lord, to breathe in your Spirit, and just to be present and to know that you are present with us. And God, we pray that may your Spirit move across this country. May your Spirit move across our communities. May your Spirit move across our churches, our parishes, and may it move among the members of our church. God, that we would just see be a movement of people that reaches out to the lost, that brings people into a greater relationship with your Son, Jesus. We make this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, it's great to be with you today. So we've kind of already seen on the screen there, we've begun with prayer. We're talking about moving from consumers to contributors. And
Tom, I don't see the slides up before you start. I'm sorry. Have you seen a little button that popped up that says show my screen? If not, I'll throw it to you again.
Let's see. Hold on one second, Jared. Oh, I'm sorry. There it goes.
Oh, good deal.
Now it's up.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, you're all set.
You know what I got to do? Let me, there we go. All right, so again, today we're talking about moving members from consumers to contributors. And it comes out a little bit from our own experience in realizing we had created religious consumers instead of making disciples of Jesus Christ. And we always kind of need to go back to this why the church exists. And we can never stop, I think, going back to why the church exists to kind of keep us focused on what our mission is working in local parishes. And so we go back to what Jesus said in Matthew 28. In Matthew 28, Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Now Jesus shares these words with the apostles, the 11 remaining loyal apostles, right before he ascends into heaven, after he's suffered, died, gone to the cross, been brutally beaten, and then he rises from the dead. So when Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, I mean, this is a pact with a lot of work and effort on Jesus' part. It's why Jesus came, that the God, the Father, when he had created the earth, gave authority to our first parents But when they sin in the Garden of Eden, they relinquish that authority. And Jesus comes back to win that authority back for humanity. And so Jesus says, all authority has been given to me. And he tells the apostles, I want you to go. I want you to go, and I want you to use this authority. And listen closely, guys. Here's how I want you to use that authority. I want you to use that authority to make disciples. And so just whatever we're doing, whatever programs we're doing at church, we need to just remember this is why we exist. We ultimately exist to make disciples. Now, when we've looked at certain mission statements from different churches across the country and studied other Protestant megachurches, which is part of our story that we talk about in Rebuilt, we ran across some pretty cool mission statements. Number one you see up on your screen is from Willow Creek. They talk about turning irreligious people into fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. So take people who don't have any interest in religion and turn them into fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. North Point Church in Atlanta says it this way, to lead people into a growing relationship with Christ. So take people wherever they are in their faith. So somebody might be a -10 when it comes to a relationship with Jesus, and lead them on a path from -10 to -6 to -5 to -2 to 0 and so forth to 2 to 5 to 10 and on and on. We just say, as a church, we want to love God, love others, and make disciples. And I think whatever mission statement you have for your church, or however you define your mission, it's important to note, again, we exist to make disciples, and we exist ultimately, which you see number 4 there, is to take people on a discipleship journey. We talk about being a pilgrim church, right? We are pilgrims on this earth. And so we are to take people on a discipleship journey. That's why the church exists. When we do another talk, which kind of is our basic story, and we talk about 3 strategies that have transformed our parish. And so number 1 was thinking of church from the perspective of Tim. And if you've read Rebuilt, you know that means Timonium Tim. That's the target audience for our church. Tim is the unchurched person. He's the person who is not going to church, we talk about in our book, because he finds it boring and bad. And so number 1 way that's one of the keys to transforming our church that's led to growth in our church in attendance and financial giving and ministers is 1, to think about church from the unchurched person's perspective. 2, we talk about creating an excellent weekend experience. That's been another transformation of our parish. That the weekend is the number 1 opportunity when Tim or the unchurched person is going to probably be introduced to your church. If people have a bad weekend experience, they're not going to really buy into anything else you have to say. And so that's the core of any Catholic church. It needs to be the weekend experience. And that's what's been so important in our parish in its transformation. The 3rd is that we've moved church people to action. And that's what we talk about today, and moving from consumers to contributors. So how do we get church people to serve the larger mission of making disciples? That's our question today. That ultimately we need people to be taking responsibility for their faith, responsibility for their own souls and their own growth, and then second, to take responsibility for serving the larger mission of making disciples. And when you get focused on this question and you figure this question out, 2 things will happen. Number 1, you will reach new people. If the members of your church care about reaching the people that are not coming to church and making disciples and reaching out and going to all nations or going out into their parish and making disciples, you will reach new people. And second, people in your parish and your pews will grow as disciples. They will go deeper. There is this false dichotomy out there that says you have to do either one or the other. There's this kind of, again, this false dichotomy, this total myth that it's not a true myth. It's myth in the sense it's not true at all. That if you try and reach new people, suddenly you can't really make disciples of the people already in your pews. And our experience is it's the exact opposite. Because part of growing as a disciple means to care about people who are not coming to church. You know, it's only in church world where we say, you know, where we say like somebody is so close to Jesus Christ that they can't make a disciple of Jesus Christ. That doesn't make any sense. If I'm growing closer to Jesus Christ, I'm naturally going to lead people into a relationship with him. I'm going to naturally start to care about the people that don't have a relationship with him. I mean, we see this in the Gospels time and time again. As people grow as disciples, they care about the people who don't have a relationship with Jesus. They want to share their relationship with Jesus. And here's another aspect of this. Jesus tells us to be a disciple of his, we need to give our lives away, right? He who wants to find his life must lose it. You must die to yourself and pick up your cross. Well, needs to be sacrifice on our part to reach new people. Sacrifice when it comes to financial sacrifice. At our parish, we ask people to sacrifice because we have parking issues, to park off campus. So there's a spot for the person who's coming to church for the first time so they can park on our campus. To go to at inopportune times to church, so there's empty seats at optimal times. So that learning to sacrifice is absolutely vital to being a disciple of Jesus Christ. So just want to kind of knock out that false dichotomy that you can either go, you know, it's very superficial to try to reach new people, and then you can't make disciples. It's absolutely not true at all. So if you think about your church, there are 4 types of people, and I sometimes do this as a visual presentation, and I don't have boxes here present, unfortunately. I'm not that great with Keynote, but there are 4 types of people in your church, and they have 4 types of commitment. You see, number 1 is the non-church people, right? They are committed to not coming to your church. I'm sorry, that's all on line number 1. The non-church people, their commitment is not coming to your church. The second group of people you have are the consumers. There are people who come to your church, and they come to consume in some way. Probably they come because out of obligation. They're coming because they feel like they need to go to church. They grew up in a time that tends to be now more an older generation, although some younger generation have this as well. But I need to go to church. I need to kind of get that obligation out of the way, and so you kind of owe me a little bit. There's some people coming to your church, again, are kind of trying to come and give their kids religion. Again, so some way it's all about them and their family. Ultimately, consumers are the people that come, and it's really all about them. They're not giving anything to your church financially, or if they are, it's pocket change. They're not giving their time. They come, it's you owe them. They're consumers. Just like when you go to a business, it's kind of like I'm paying, you owe me. They're consumers. The next group you see there is contributors. Those are people who are giving something to your church. They're supporting a little bit more financially. They volunteer in your programs. They support you in other ways. If you ask for help, they'll give you help. So the next group is contributors. And finally is committed. Those are people who are sold out for your church. Those are people, you know, who you ask anything, you ask to jump, they say how high, and they're the first ones to get involved in your programs. Again, what we're talking about mostly today is that second category of consumers moving in, jumping in to the contributors. And here's the thing. Again, if the church is a movement, right, the church is supposed to be a movement. That's what Christ created. And this movement changed the world. And Acts of the Apostles tells us how this movement changed the world. Well, that means individual people need to be moving. Because the church, we say it all the time, right, is about people. So if the church is a movement, people are going to be moving deeper and deeper from non-church people to consumers to contributors to committed members of your church. So that's what we're talking about here. So the church is made of people who are moving. And here's what happens. If you move people from consumers to contributors and from contributors to committed, you will create a space, a gap, so that unchurched people can move in and fill that space. So those are some of the type of people. Now let's dig in a little bit to consumers, since that's the group we're really trying to move, right? We're trying to move the consumers. So let's look into those consumers in your church. Now, and just clear out again some other misconceptions. Number one, people come into church as consumers. And just as people came to Jesus to consume, the crowds of people came to Jesus because they wanted something from him. They came, as you can see up on your screen, to be healed, to be fed, because he was a great preacher. And so when the church produces consumers, that's okay, because people, at first, it's all right, because people came to Jesus to consume. Also, when we look at the apostles, they didn't come to Jesus for purely altruistic reasons, right? So it's okay that people don't come for purely altruistic reasons. The apostles followed Jesus because he would be king. They believed he was somebody, and they wanted to get in on what Jesus was doing. I mean, think about the story where Jesus tells the apostles, I'm going to Jerusalem. There I'm going to suffer. I'm going to be handed over to sin, to the Gentiles. I'm going to suffer and die and nailed to the cross. And then Jesus and the apostles, they go on a journey. And then they arrive at their destination. And Jesus turns to the apostles and says, what were you guys talking about on the way? And we're told in the scriptures, they're talking about who was the greatest. So these guys certainly didn't come to Jesus for altruistic reasons either. And here's another thing about consumers. It's not wrong for them to expect blessing. When I read the Gospels, I'm amazed at how often Jesus promises reward or blessing if we'll do what we ask him to do. So again, Jesus doesn't say to do what he asks us to do for, again, completely altruistic reasons. He says do it out of self-interest. Be strategic. God's blessing comes when you listen and obey. So, for example, I have a couple of examples up there on the screen. In John 13, Jesus washes the disciples' feet, right? This is on the night of the Last Supper. And Jesus gets up from washing their feet, and he says, you call me master, and indeed I am, for I am your master. But if I, your master, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. To which, if you're like me, I'm kind of like, man, I really don't want to do that. There is nothing about that that's very appealing. Except then Jesus says, and blessed are you if you do it. So even at that act, which was, again, such a great model for us, Jesus says, blessed are you if you follow my example. The rich young man comes up to Jesus and says, what good must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus tells him to give away all his possessions, and he can't do it, and he walks away. And then Peter comes up to him and says, we've left everything and followed you. What's in it for us? And Jesus says, I promise you 100-fold blessing in this life and the next. So it's not wrong to expect blessing. It's not a problem, again, that people consume or expect blessing or come for their kids or to meet an obligation or, again, whatever way they come to consume at first. Here's the real problem, and you see it on the screen there. People don't move from consuming to contributor to, there's a typo there, to committed. We don't want to move into committees necessarily, but they don't move from consumer to contributor to being committed. The problem is they don't move. They come in, and for months, which is okay, years, but then eventually, or even decades, people stay in that consumer mode that you owe me. And they don't commit to a relationship with Christ. And they don't commit through his church. They don't commit to his church. They don't commit to a relationship with Christ through his church. That's the problem. People stay in consumer mode rather than moving into a relationship mode that ultimately leads to their contributing, or to being contributors. So that's a little bit about consumers. Some other things about movement. When people are moving, churches become more attractive. People sense that. They sense that this is a vibrant place to be. Again, ultimately, in all of our asking of people to commit and give their time or their money or whatever way we're asking them to contribute, we're asking them to become more committed to Christ and his church. And it's ultimately about that relationship. And as I noted a little bit earlier, we're asking people to take responsibility for their own spiritual growth and their own relationship with Christ and others, and to contribute to the local parish and its mission. And again, this is all vital for people's spiritual growth. This isn't an add-on. It's got to be core. Okay, so here's some primary ways we ask people to contribute to our parish. And one of the ways not listed up there is personal prayer. We obviously want people to invest in their own relationship with Christ through personal prayer. But this is how we ask people, excuse me a second. But these are the 4 ways we kind of ask people that's kind of outside, that are more intentional, kind of more, that tie more into the larger church. So the 4 primary ways. Number 1, we want people to get in a small group. And what Romans says right there, I'll learn from your, for I long to see you, that it may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. And what Paul's saying to the Romans, and what we found to be true, because then we just learn by each other's faith. We learn by each other's faith. So we're asking members of our parish to come and sit in a small group, which is about a group of 8 to 10 people, and then pray and have conversations about our message and just share life together. We're saying when they bring their faith, that they are encouraging other people, and then they can get encouraged and grow in their own faith as well. So number 1, we want people to join a small group. Number 2, we want people to get involved in ministry and missions, or missions. So it's to serve in some way that builds up the church. And here's the quote from Ephesians. And his gifts were that some should be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, to equip the saints, the people in our pews, for the work of ministry, for the building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith, the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. So Paul tells us in Ephesians very clearly that as pastors, teachers, staff members, our job is to equip the saints or the members of our church for ministry. And that leads to spiritual maturity. So we want to move people that way. Number 3, we want people to give financially and support the parish. We need money to do ministry. It's just that simple. And that's been from the beginning of the church. Acts 2, I don't have the exact quote there, but Acts 2, 43 to 47 just shares that people gave their money. They had all things in common. And as a result, God added daily to the church. That somehow financial giving, support of the church, leads to the growth of the church. And partly I think that's just, again, the spirit. When there's a spirit of generosity at the church, it makes the church more attractive. But at the end of the day, on a very practical way too, money is needed to do ministry. It's needed to turn on the lights. It's needed to pay staff. It's needed to just fund programs. So we ask people to give. And number 4, we want people to invite others to church. That the growth of the church comes from one-on-one invitation. Jesus says, go and make disciples. And although I'm not a Greek scholar, my understanding is that the go is kind of as you are going. As you are living your life, be on the lookout for people who are far from God and bring them into a relationship with him. So those are commitments that we ask people to make to become committed to our church. All right. So the $64,000 question, how do we do these 4 things? How do we get people to move from consumers to contributors? So there you go, how to move people. And I kind of share these in 7 steps or 7 things we do. They may not all be chronologically in that way, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to move people. And so you can kind of see the first couple up here. Number 1, you need to pray. That sounds pretty elementary, but we're locked into kind of spiritual battle as we're asking people to contribute to our church and to give more of themselves. And so we need to pray, because ultimately this isn't in our hands, it's in God's hands. We're asking people to grow spiritually, And really, at the end of the day, only God can produce that spiritual growth. So number one, pray. Number two, you need to, as you see up there, move yourself or lead by example. It's very hard to go ask people, to talk to people. As you see, number three is going to be ask them to move. But it's hard to ask other people to move if you haven't moved yourself. We ask people to get in a small group. Myself, our pastor, Father White, we're in small groups. So we're not asking people to do what we don't do. We talk about giving in a little bit. We talk about giving. We don't ask them to do what we haven't done ourselves. If you're going to ask somebody, to volunteer in a ministry, obviously we're already doing ministry, but maybe you can volunteer yourself outside the church, but looking for opportunity or do something extra at the church so you're leading by example. So you need to move yourself. Again, the church is about movement, and the kind of movement needs to begin with our own selves and our relationship with God. There's a story about Gandhi that I heard before. I think illustrates this really well. One time, people apparently people would stand in line for hours and hours just to have a few minutes with Gandhi. And so one time, there was a woman whose son was just eating too much sugar, and he was rotting his teeth. It was killing him. And so she got in line for hours to see Gandhi, and then she gets up to Gandhi and she says to him, "Tell my son to stop eating sugar." And Gandhi just kind of shook his head and said, "Come back in 3 months." So this woman did what he was asked. She got back in line 3 months later, waited hours and hours and hours to see him. The boy was with her. She gets up to Gandhi, and the Gandhi says to the boy, "Stop eating sugar." To which the mother said to him, "Why didn't you tell him that 3 months ago?" And Gandhi said, "Because I had to stop eating sugar." So we carry so much more moral authority. Jesus had authority because he did what he asked others to do. So we lead by example. Number three, this is revolutionary, I understand, but ask them to move. Some of you are like, why is that even up there? That seems pretty obvious. But here's reality, and you can see it up there in my notes. Most people don't get out of their comfort zone without being asked or maybe even pushed or nudged out of it. Bill Hybels talks about this, that leadership is about asking. It's about the ask. So you need to ask people to move. Now, that said, how you ask people matters. And you see up there in my notes, people give to vision, not to neediness. Okay? So often, how do we ask? We ask out of, please, 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 we need catechists. We need catechists, we need 10 catechists, please step in and do it. Well, people give to vision, not to out of our neediness. Now, some people will give to neediness. There are people that are easily given to guilt, and there are people who would, kind of Protestant world talk about a mercy gift. They just happen to have compassion on other people. People like me who have no compassion for others, we're never going to serve if you ask out of neediness. So people give to vision, not to neediness. And again, as you see there in my notes, so when you ask people to give, to contribute, talk about the vision for them. Say, here's why you need to give financially. You need to give because as you give, that opens up God's blessing and provision over your finances. Here, let me tell you why if you give your time, you're going to connect to the mission of the church, and you're going to connect to God in a way you never have before. Here's why you need a small group. You need to get in a small group because you need some support. You need some people around you to help encourage you in your faith. Here's why you need to invest and invite, because you can make an eternal difference in somebody else's life. You kind of imagine what kind of life that is to live, to bring your friend into a relationship with Christ. You need to paint vision for them and then paint vision for the church. And here's why you need to give. When you give, you create opportunities for other people to come to know Christ. When you give of your time, you are helping to create this irresistible environment that people want to be a part of. You're flying information. You're flying with other people as a team to help create an irresistible environment. So you can see up there, it's okay to say they're needed because people want to be needed. They want their things to matter. They want their time, their money, their energy to matter. just don't ask out of neediness. That's not compelling or attractive. And as you see up there again, it only gets you people who are guilty or feel guilty or are very sensitive and compassionate. So also you want to cast vision again of what it will accomplish. So for example, I have up there the parking minister story. Parking, me as my wife. About a year ago, we didn't have any parking ministers for our Saturday night mass. And at one point, and it's because that mass had kind of grown and we haven't really been paying attention that we needed parking ministers out there and probably should have been there anyway. But in any case, one Saturday, my wife, Mia, was supposed to come to mass, so meet me for mass. I was already working. And then she never showed up. So after mass, I called her and said, hey, where were you, Mia? And she's like, I couldn't get out in the parking lot. It was too full. Now, in our church, we kind of have some turf parking, but it needs to be managed. That's why one of the reasons we need parking ministers. But because we didn't have parking ministers, she couldn't get on the lot. So I leveraged that. I sent emails to people. I said, hey, I need you to start serving on our parking team. My own wife couldn't get onto the lot last week. Can you help? And I even noted, it's okay if Mia can't get on. She's going to come back to church. She's a church person. But imagine if she was an unchurched person. We lost that opportunity. So again, you need a cast vision of why it matters. Also save letters. So you see there on the screen Josh's letter. If you've read our book, Rebuilt, I even know the page number, page 121, has Josh Gleekin, who wrote a letter to us, and we save that because he painted so well the impact that ministers made. And so you want to save letters about impact, or save emails, or save things when people tell you the impact your church has made on their lives, or a ministry has made, or if you're in children's ministry and you're looking for children's ministers, if you get a letter from a mom or a dad or something from a kid saying the difference your work made, save that. That is so much, that is gold. And when you are recruiting for people to serve or recruiting for money or whatever you're recruiting for, you put that letter out there and you say, look, this is what you can accomplish. Another thing about asking is seasons of asking. Put it into your schedule and have concerted efforts. So you can kind of see up there, this is our usual rhythm of how we ask. So in November, we always have our Stewardship Sunday right before Thanksgiving. That's every November, the weekend before Thanksgiving. We tend to ask about people joining small groups or invite people to join in small groups in January. It's kind of a new year, and people kind of want to get into church mode, so they might do it. We ask for ministry in March. And then invest and invite, especially around Christmas time or Easter time, we might ask people to invest and invite. So just have seasons of asking and put it into your schedule. Then number 5, under asking, preaching is so important. We tend to think in some militaristic terms here. So you can see there it says preaching is air cover for your ground war. So if the pastor is preaching about getting involved in ministry or getting into a small group or investing and inviting, it's going to be so much easier for for somebody else on the staff to ask people to do that, to kind of reinforce that. Also, again, it sends the church out in a united message, a united front of, hey, right now, everybody committed to this church is going to get into a small group, or everyone committed to this church is going to really look at their giving and figure out their giving for the coming year. So it's, like I said, air cover for your ground war. So if you serve in ministry, lobby for your pastor for a ministry weekend or a giving weekend, which I'm sure your pastor would probably be all about. So do a small groups weekend. Whatever major programs you want to push, lobby for a weekend to push them. Number 4 there, or letter D, however you want to say that, make movement accessible. Put rungs on the ladder. You're asking them to take, asking them to take baby steps, make it easy, make it a minimal time commitment. So you have some of the things I have here. For ministry, we have asked people, greet, park cars, serve coffee. one of the reasons we struggle to get people volunteering in ministry is, again, we create this huge gap. You have people who have never served in any way, and then we say, hey, can you teach, an hour and a half middle school class every single week for 9 months out of the year? Well, somebody who's never served in your church, that's a really high hurdle. And they don't know enough about the Bible, and they don't know enough about the catechism, and again, they've never given any time to your church, and you're asking them to go from like 0 to 60. That's a big gap. So you want to have small ministry that is small, easy things that anybody can do. Another way we try to make ministry kind of put a rung on the ladder for ministry is first serve. So again, we say to people, come try it once. You don't have to do this for the rest of your life. Just come try it once. Small groups, so you see there. We say, come to an event. Come to our small group event, and we'll walk you through and get you in a small group so it's up and going. So that's what we do for small groups. Money. Sometimes churches say, hey, we're a tithing parish. Just start tithing. I 100% believe in tithing. And I would challenge somebody one-on-one to tithe if they really asked me. But, it's very hard for someone to go from giving 0% or 0.5% to 10%. So the way we lay it out to people is say, hey, look, just become intentional about the percentage you're giving to the church. Pick a percentage, start giving it, and then next year reevaluate and come back and look to giving a higher percentage away. We create movements with evangelization in this way. We say just invest and invite. Right? When Jesus called the first apostles, he calls them, he says, just come and see. Come and, Rabbi, where are you going? Where are you going? Come and see. Hang out with me. So our strategy for evangelization, we borrowed from North Point Church. It's called invest and invite. So we say to parishioners, look, as you're in your workplace, with your friends, your family, just invest in those relationships naturally. And, those people that aren't going to church, and when appropriate, invite them to come to our church. So that's how we evangelize. Again, I think as a church we often get this kind of, it's a good heart, good intentions. We're like, well, go door to door. Well, most people don't really feel that comfortable going door to door, and I'm not sure how receptive our culture is to that anyway. Or we tell people, okay, what you need to do is memorize the catechism, and know about the fall and sin, and the hypostatic union, and Jesus coming, and all this different stuff, and then go out and evangelize them, and then when they become Christian or Catholic, then bring them in. Well, for some people, maybe who know all that theology and feel very comfortable talking about the faith and are very outgoing, that's very easy. But most people aren't going to do that. But can you invest and invite? Do you have some relationships? Yeah. Can you invest in them? Yeah. Can you pray for those people? Yeah. When appropriate, could you say, come and see our church and invite them? Yeah. So there you go. Someone's moved from a consumer to a contributor. So that's number D. That's letter D, or number 4. Have a great product. Or do your work with excellence is another way. So I just wrote there Apple products. People evangelize for Apple because they love the products, because they think it's so excellent. Or if you go onto a great restaurant or had something you love to do, you don't need those companies don't have to ask you to tell other people about them. You do it. You do it easily. Another example there of a priest who had talked about, always challenging the congregation. Well, what are you putting in the Mass? And I kind of shot back and said, well, what are we putting in the Mass? The reality is we can't ask people to put anything in the Mass if we're not putting our best efforts into the music and the preaching and ministers. So again, we found as a church, when it comes to invest and invite, or even asking people to do anything, that because they know we put our best efforts into our weekend experience, they're going to follow us. A couple of years ago, we moved our Easter services, and we thought this was going to be a big challenge to move them off campus because we had to. We were just too full, and people just said, "All right, we'll go." a consumer mentality said, well, why do you want to do that? And like, no, we'll go because we know you guys will do it great. We know you'll do it excellently, and we'll just follow you guys there. So when you put your energy and efforts and have excellence, people will follow. They'll give to it. Another way to do that is just make it fun and a good experience. If somebody steps out to volunteer, comes to a first serve, make sure it's a good experience for them. Make sure it's fun. Make sure they're glad they came. And then ultimately just lead with excellence. Letter F, celebrate movement. Celebrate movement. When people move, again, they've moved out of their comfort zone. For us who've been doing church for our whole lives or just been around church our whole lives or church people, for us to volunteer, it's not a big deal. We're like, it's a big deal. It doesn't seem that, it's church world. We're kind of used to it. But for some people, especially who have never volunteered or have never given before or never invested and invited, this is a big step for them. And we need to celebrate their movement. Kind of gives away the punchline there, but Truett Cackley had a great quote. He said, how do you know if someone needs encouragement? They're breathing. Everybody needs encouragement. Hebrews says, let us consider how we may encourage one another on the love and good deeds. So celebrate movement is part of encouraging people. You can do that by thanking them. So if someone comes and serves with you for the first time, make sure you write them a little note or email them and say, thank you for serving. It was so great to see you. I really appreciated your time. As someone, when people start giving to your church, there should be some kind of note or letter that goes out to them. Our pastor's really good at this. If someone comes up to you at church and says, hey, I brought Joe with me, our pastor makes a big fuss about that, and he'll just say, he'll just make a big fuss over the person and how much we love having in our church that invited them. So you got to thank them. Another thing you see up there is publicly celebrate. So some of the things we do, first of all, our Stewardship Sunday is meant to be a celebration of what God's doing at our church. For people who step into ministry, we have a video announcement and we'll list their names at our church and say, hey, thank you to these people who've stepped into ministry. So publicly celebrate. And then finally, you see number 4 under that, what gets rewarded gets repeated. So when people are rewarded, that doesn't mean you have to buy them things or, it's money or anything like that. Rewards are thank yous. Rewards are little celebrations. Rewards are encouragement. That's what we mean by that. And so pastors and priests, people who are preaching, your words reward people. So if you say, I want to thank someone who did this, or thank you to the people who did that, that's a reward, and it will get repeated. And then finally, persevere. Persevere. This takes time. In the last webinar, someone had asked a question about our whole book and about some of the change in our parish. How long did it take? And the question was, does it take 45 to 60 days? And unfortunately, it doesn't. It takes a lot longer than that. It takes years. I would say about 3 years. To really change a culture takes 3 to 5 years. But just keep turning the flywheel, as Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great. Persevere. Because if you do persevere, you will see change in your culture. So that's all I have for today. Jared, you got some questions?
Yeah, I do. Hold on. Excuse me. I'm going to take controls back over to me so you don't have to worry about what's on your screen here. So Tom, thanks so much. That really, I'm obviously being here at Ivy, I'm really aware of kind of what's going on in the rebuilt world, and that was actually new. A lot of that stuff was new to me, so thank you very much for that.
Oh, good.
Just pulling up the screen. Hopefully you can
add one more thing?
Go for it, yeah.
One more thing, Jared?
Yeah.
Just a couple things, applications too. Number one, I think as a church staff, have conversations about what is it you want people to do. Sometimes people don't do what we want to do. We don't know. I could kind of lay out for you. Here's what we want people to do as a church. It's a very elementary question, but what does the disciple look like in your parish, and what do you want them to do? And then you can create do those things to move them in that direction. And then second, another application from this is just, what's the area you need to start focusing on. So we talk about small groups or ministry. Again, depending upon what people's roles they play, they might have specific one thing they really want their congregation to work on. So give that some thought.
No, that's great. And I think a lot of people who are here asking questions are focusing on certain areas that you've mentioned. Let's start with small groups. Is that okay? Does that sound good?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. So we have a number of questions about small groups. I think that's something that you did bring to the table for sure with your books and with the work that you're doing that people are very interested in doing. I have about 3 questions that are asking about format, or if you script it. In particular, are they just a Bible study? Do you have an outline of topics, or do you present them with materials to use in the small groups, or is it more fluid? So I'm getting a lot of questions like that. I don't know if you can address kind of the format of the small groups. Are they meeting at home? Are they meeting at church?
Yeah. Well, first of all, yeah, small groups we want them meeting at home as much as possible, just because that, again, multiplies impact. There's only so much space here at the church. So, yeah, we do move them to homes. We try to keep a very simple format. We want groups beginning with prayer. Actually, even before that, just kind of gathering, and especially meeting in the evening, sharing about the day, conversing, and prayer. Then we have for most weeks series, most times groups have a DVD we've produced. We do have that online, and people are welcome to check that out at churchnativity.tv, and then click on small groups and small group podcasts. You're welcome to use that. So we have a DVD. It's usually a presentation by me. It's about 10 minutes, and then we have questions. So it's a very short presentation, then questions, and then we ask groups to pray together. Hopefully everybody prays out loud, and they go home. So very simple format. Try to think of some other questions you had out there. That's a little about the format, meet in homes.
What about content? Do you have like programs, or do you encourage strict Bible studies?
Yeah, and we kind of say about small groups, it's not Bible study,
Mm-hmm.
It's not a prayer meeting, it's not a counseling session, but there's sort of elements of all 3 of those things that could be in small groups, in the sense that someone's got a problem. We certainly want them to share it with their small group, and we certainly hope people are learning about the Bible a little bit and getting more familiar with the Scripture. We certainly want them praying together, but it's not any one of those 3 things. So if someone wanted a Bible study, we kind of direct them to other programs in the area.
Oh, great.
That are going on. But
that's an interesting distinction. So you would say, if someone was doing like an actual program, you'd say this parish is doing this if you're interested in that.
Yeah, or
about that topic.
There's certain parishioners at our church we know who are big into Bible studying. So
yeah.
I actually just happened last week. Someone said I want to do a Bible study. I'm like, all right, that's great. But we do distinguish small groups from that, because small groups are more about relationships. Again, the mutually encouraged by one another's faith.
Yeah.
And the content of our lives being that conversation and how it intersects with God's Word. And we just find, especially with men, Bible studies a lot of time have research and studying and that kind of thing. And men that are in the workplace, I'm not trying to say women don't have the time, but men especially just don't seem to have the time or energy or maybe interest to do that. So that's why we kind of push small groups as being different from Scripture study.
And you mentioned the DVDs or the podcasts that you use. They're often used at the beginning of the small group meeting, right? Usually you speaking about some topic or introducing it, connecting it to the weekend message. And it's at your website, right? So can you tell us the URL, or maybe just if they go to your church's, the parish's website, and then find it on the side there?
If they go to churchnativity.tv, then click on small groups, and then it's small group podcast. So
okay.
Sometimes people have trouble finding that. But there's so many resources out there for small groups. But for us, it's very message-driven because we do the message series.
Okay. So churchnativity.tv, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Good. So hopefully that answers a lot of questions about small groups. Churchnativity.tv, or if you can search for Church Nativity and Timonium, you can find it that way if you want to do a search online. We have a number of people who are asking about tools for rebuilding, and so I'll address that now. I want to talk about it more in a minute, I guess. But tools for rebuilding, they're asking, is it out yet? It's not out yet. It should be out in November. Tom, just to address that, because it seems like a lot of people already know about it who are asking the questions, but can you say a little bit about Tools for Rebuilding before we get into some of the other questions about what's different about this new book that's coming out in November? How does it distinguish itself from, say, Rebuilt?
I'd say Rebuilt's a kind of larger story and the larger kind of strategy, so that's the first book I would encourage people to read. 75 Tools for Rebuilding is 75 kind of really, really practical ways to make your parish better. So they're more tactical. They're more kind of hands-on. There's also some leadership kind of axioms too, such as, there you go, Christmas is over, so throw out the poinsettias. I'm not sure it's an axiom as much. One church, one message you see there. Some things on the sacraments, that our approach to the sacraments and how we do that. Some things on preaching, our approach to money. And then, just, again, some other leadership axioms like there are no silver bullets. And I think in church we tend to look for the silver bullets and think it's going to solve everything, and there really isn't any. So things like that.
Good.
It'll be very easy reading. It's very easy reading.
Very short chapters. I mean, 75 different chapters, and yeah, I love that there's every kind of ministry is featured, which I like that a lot. And so we can talk more about that maybe in a few minutes. There's lots to talk about, lots going on in the Nativity. But I do want to address some of the specific questions that some people have asked. One question is, just point blank, says, how does Nativity catechize its members? Clearly you guys are focused on evangelization, but how would you do kind of the catechesis, or how would you say that you do the catechesis? I think it's really referring to adult catechesis more than just, children's religious education.
Yeah, that's what someone asked me at one point, what do you do for adult faith formation?
Yeah.
It's all adult faith formation. So it's not separating another category over there. So the weekend homily, and which is very core to what we do here, that's catechesis, or that's adult faith formation. That's forming people. Even the experience of coming to church, the sacraments, the Mass itself, and the way we approach that is forming people. Again, there's an excitement about our parish, and the ministers help create this. There's an excitement about coming to Mass. I rejoiced when I heard them say, let us go to the house of the Lord. Your church is saying either let us rejoice when they come to the house of the Lord or something else. So, there's that. The small groups are catechesis. Again, there's little parts. We're talking about prayer right now because the scripture readings are really on prayer. And so we're teaching people how to pray in our small groups. We have a daily email that goes out to people. So all of that is ongoing, and it's adult faith formation without calling it that.
Yeah, I mean, you all are doing tons. I mean, absolutely, and I love the fact that everything you do is connected to that weekend experience. The weekend, the message at the Mass is also filtered into your daily emails. You send out into your small groups that you do. So it's a consistency there that I think really is powerful. So let's see what else we have coming up here. All kinds of questions coming in. I'll go to you addressed this in the webinar. I think the way you said it was great. That that there is not that there's kind of a false myth of this. If you're catering to the people who are not there, the lost, that you're going to lose the people who are there. But you did talk about this in the book. So one question that came in by email, Judy said that how do you overcome the feeling of longtime members that are reaching out to the lost or the unchurched, that they'll be taken away from what they get from being part of their current church now? So I'll read that again. How do you overcome the feeling of longtime members, or that fear maybe of longtime members who are when you're making that transition to the lost or the unchurched? You mentioned a couple of those kind of encounters you had with people who were upset about the changes that were going on in Nativity. How did you manage that transition when it was happening in Nativity?
I don't know. We managed it really well. So, I mean, we probably could have managed it better. So it's going to happen. I think if you can have some conversations with people about this is what Jesus told us to do. I think it comes a lot of times in, well, what about my family and what about me? And I think we got a lot of that, and that can be puzzling. I don't know. For me, it could be a big stumbling block for people, for you personally, to move forward in reaching the lost. Like, oh yeah, your family does matter. But again, I'd go back to helping explain to people, but if you really want to grow to be like Jesus, you need to care about the people that are lost. And this isn't about you not being fed and nurtured, but it's not all about you being fed. Hopefully we're going to continue that, and small groups are a great example. Had a guy had a big bike accident, is in Washington, D.C., so there's no way our pastor would go visit him. He's in Washington, D.C., because that's where he's recuperating. I'm not sure I understand the reasons why, but his whole small group just went down there last Sunday, the whole group, and visited him. Now, we could never do that as a church.
Sure.
Our pastor could never do that, but a small group could. So it's not about them not being nurtured, but it's also, I think you got to be clear, it's not all about them either. And if they really want to find their life, they got to lose it. So That's what Jesus said. So it's conversations, but at some point, some people aren't going to accept that. Some people are just like, well, it's not all about me. I'm gone, or I'm not gonna buy in. And some part of us just has to accept that.
So Pam just asked a great question. She says, did you meet any resistance to small group formation, and how did you address that?
I don't know. I guess I don't know if we had a huge pushback. I guess we did a little bit because the way we introduced it was through 40 Days of Purpose. So and that was kind of felt like a Protestant thing. So you could get like some people might say it's a Protestant thing. I think it's growing in Catholic churches. So I think just the people that don't like it just don't do it. But it doesn't seem to be as in people's faces as much as maybe changing weekend things or inviting people to get in the ministry.
And it sounds like, I mean, the way you described it, the four types of people that are in the parish. I mean, a lot of the people that aren't, getting involved, they're probably still in that consumer stage. So maybe there's more that needs to go on. I think that's a great way of laying that out for sure. So again, we have all kinds of other questions coming in. One kind of nuts and bolts question was about, do you have a Sunday bulletin? How do you use your bulletin, for evangelization purposes? Do you have like a evangelization ad? I think that was the way somebody described it here in the questions. How do you use that, or do you have it? I don't even know.
Yeah, that's actually something we got rid of a bulletin about a little over a year ago.
Oh, you did?
It's actually in the book. Yeah, we do have like a card that we use now, and we're still trying to get our members of our parish actually used to it. We still, unfortunately, get rid of a lot, and we're trying to figure out how to get parishioners to use those cards. But
what is the card? Can you describe what the card is?
Mm-hmm. So on the one half of the card is kind of a look for our series. So again, this is a little something unique to our parish, but we have a series. So right now we're in a series called Response Ability, 2 words, and we're talking about our responsibility to God, our ability to respond to His blessings, opens us up for further blessings and further relationship with Him.
That's the message series right now, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's a look to that we've put together. Then the other side has kind of our mass times, our children. Half of it has our mass times, our children's programs, and the other half has kind of deeper steps for parishioners. So kind of some of the things we talked about today. So that's my email. So that card, though, we say, look, that's a good invitation to invite someone to church to use that. So
you'd say they can give that to somebody to say, hey, come to Nativity.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I wouldn't see your bulletin as a great opportunity to invest.
Right.
I think it could be, but I'd say it's more, again, the personal relationship. Or at a parish, I would say develop some cards that kind of have that information that someone could take. It's a little more portable.
I love that idea. So there's one thing that you're equipping parishioners to be able to go out there and invite people to Nativity. What other ways are you equipping them to do that investing and inviting? Are you giving them kind of scenarios in which they can make that ask or that invitation, or what kinds of other things are you doing for them to help them out?
We probably need to work on this a little bit. It's kind of come to my mind that we need to come back to the invest and invite a little bit, and we will at Christmas time. As I said, we always kind of use that. And Christmas Eve is a great opportunity to invite people to church. So, but we probably need to go back at some point to another message series. Again, we do these message series about having a heart for people that aren't coming to Christ and why that matters. And but right now, no, we have those cards. Again, we'll make a big push at Christmas. Some of it, personally, for us, too, is we are kind of maxed out of space, and we're working on solving that problem. But it's hard for us to really push, invest, and invite when there's not really a space for people to come sit. So.
Sure. So one more question before we wrap things up. We have lots of questions that are coming in, and Tom, I'll send this to you. Maybe you can address them on the road or maybe in future webinars. But a lot of people have asked about the role of the pastor, and these are a lot of questions are coming from people who are lay people in the church. They want to see some change in their parish. Do you have any advice for somebody who's either a lay minister, working on the staff at a parish, or even just a parishioner, on how to communicate or work with the pastor to try to shift that focus a little bit? I mean, you kind of have your own story, and obviously Father Michael's very much at the helm of all this. But how would you suggest people would approach their pastor to do some of these things you're talking about?
Number one, I'd say pray. So
that's great.
It sounds like a church answer, but pray for favor before you go in and talk to him. 2, again, it depends on your relationship with the pastor. So if you have a good relationship, you could probably if so a lot of people say, hey, I want to give the book, that kind of thing, give the book and say, but I would not do it if you don't really have a relationship with the pastor. I'd be slow to do that. I'd try to establish a relationship first. We're kind of doing some raising of money for new building, and we're kind of eventually, but we never just go into someone's office and say, can we have money?
Sure, sure.
Because that doesn't develop the relationship, and ultimately that's what goes back to. We want a relationship with people before we ask them anything, I think. So, if you don't have a relationship, I'd work on developing that relationship. And if you're not volunteering, I would definitely volunteer in some way, because that's going to give you a lot more accessibility.
Absolutely.
And then my only third thing is just to do everything humbly. That if you say, hey, we've learned some, I've read this book, or I'm hearing some things, I'd like you to encourage you to check it out. Do that humbly. Humility goes a long way.
Good. Well, thanks, Tom.
I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
no, I think it really is. I do think it is. I think it's a great answer. And those are, there's like the big picture, and then there's the little picture. Yeah, big picture of how to change, yourself, and then also, that leads into making changes in the parish. Thanks so much, Tom. This has been great. I think this is a great, extension to what the books were about, and I think gives some specific strategies and framework for what you're talking about. Still lots more questions coming in, and this is great. And thank you so much for everyone who's here participating. I think you and Father Michael are both coming back in December for another webinar, the last webinar we have scheduled for the fall season. So thank you, and we'll have you back again. We'll maybe use some of these questions later on.
That sounds good.
Yeah, so just like every time we talked about Tools for Rebuilding, which is coming out in November, you can pre-order that now. If you'd like to use a coupon code or a promo code for participating in today's webinar, you can use webinar 1028, which is today's date, I believe. If you use that promo code, you can get 20% off of either Rebuilt or Tools for Rebuilding, or multiple copies of either one. So take advantage of that if you go to AveMariaPress.com. Tools for Rebuilding will be out in November. You can pre-order it now. We'll ship it to you as soon as it is published. I mentioned this before in other webinars, and also it's in the book, but you can go to the website rebuiltparish.com, which has resources to go along with the book Rebuilt, and other extensions of the book, including a podcast that Tom and youth minister there, Chris Wesley, do every other week, right, Tom?
Correct, yeah.
Maybe can you give us a 10-second summary of what you guys have been doing in that podcast? Which you're up to episode, 14 or something like that, maybe more. I can't remember.
Yeah, we've covered a whole bunch of topics from money. We talked about the music. We talked about youth ministry, children's ministry. So kind of the weekend overall, and so it's kind of a little bit relational. Chris and I kind of share what's going on a little bit in our lives, or just what's happening, and just the conversation we have about the topic. So, and there's usually a couple of key points to take away as well.
Good. I like that you're very specific in the webinar, or the podcast. They're very focused on a certain type of thing that you're doing, or for certain type of ministry. So thank you for doing that. Just briefly, also, in a couple of weeks, I'm excited to be going out to Timonium, to be in Baltimore at the Matter 13 conference on November 8th, 2013. But it is sold out, as you have probably already heard. If you go to matterconference.tv, you can find out more about that conference. Again, you guys will be having it next year, I assume. And Tom, they can watch it online, right? If they can't attend because it is sold out, they can watch it at matterconference.tv. Is that correct?
Yeah, matterconference.tv. You can watch it live stream. So we'll be live streaming throughout the day. The two, we'll have main sessions at 9 and at 4, and then breakouts in the church, and we'll be live streaming those specific breakouts. Then you can sign up if you're upset you didn't get in Matter 13, Matter 14 will be Friday, November 7th. So
great.
Block that out in your calendar.
I'm sure they'll be able to register very soon enough for that, I'm sure. That's exciting. Good. Well, thanks again, Tom. And I just want to real quickly thank our partners before we wrap things up. The National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. This webinar is being recorded. You can get a recording of the webinar at avemariapress.com/webinar-videos, and we have recordings both on vimeo.com and youtube.com. And finally, next Tuesday, November 5th, we'll have a webinar presented by Tim and Sue Muldoon, Faith Formation for Families, with six sacred rules. They'll be talking about their new book called Six Sacred Rules for Family. Tim is a professor at Boston College and a writer specializing in Ignatian spirituality, and Sue, his wife Muldoon, is also obviously a wife, a parent, and a DRE. So they're providing a presentation on how we can work with families to do a little faith formation, something Tom mentioned briefly today. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you here in a couple weeks, next week, on November 5th for our next webinar. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Jared. Great job.